probably would not surprised that I am saying worship, but it really, while it's probably the most not surprising one, and the reason for that is because it is so important. In the Quran, Allah says, "I did not create the jinns and the human beings except for the purpose that they should worship me." So, worshiping God is a key part of our creation. And worshiping isn't just about the 5 daily prayers. It's not just about prostration, but doing good acts as well. That's something that we expanded on. But worshiping from an ego perspective, especially the pillars of Islam, they really have this powerful way of purifying the ego. Because, for example, when a person prostrates like this in this image, you're putting your head on the foreground for the sake of God. It's a very humbling act. It's a very humbling for the ego to do that, because the ego would not want to do that. The ego would not want to put its head on the foreground for anyone, especially I'm talking about an untamed ego. So when you do that, you're basically saying, oh God, only to you do I prostrate. You are superior to me. You are greater than me. And we're acknowledging God's greatness and our, I guess, limitedness, or, limited power. And so, and the same happens with fasting as well. Like when you're fasting, it has this amazing effect on your way of thinking, and it has an amazing effect on one's ego. Because again, the ego wants to think it's invincible. When you fast, you realize, wow, I am not invincible. I can't even go without food and water for one whole day without feeling its effect. So it's humbling again. It really is humbling, and it's a reality check on a person, because they realize that they aren't invincible, that they are dependent on food and water and sustenance. And then the next point is realizing that sustenance comes from God. So if He didn't provide the sustenance, if we didn't grow it on the earth and so forth, we would be destitute. So it really puts again the ego in its place and making it realize that it's dependent on God. There's probably another aspect of fasting that benefits the ego, because discipline. One thing the ego doesn't like is discipline. Whereas when a person is fasting, they learn to discipline. You're basically saying to your ego or your nafs, well, hold on, you're not just getting what you want when you want. You've got to be, you're under my control. It's a very powerful act, actually, when you think of it that way. So, and so that's the two of the, I guess, pillars of Islam I've mentioned, but I would say that each of the pillars of Islam have a way of combating or addressing the ego and purifying the ego. And they all humble the ego. I'll just remembered one hadith. I'll mention that as well. There's about fasting, because it's a conversation. In this, according to this hadith, there's a conversation between God and the ego, and God says to the ego, "Who are you?" And the ego says, "I am me, and you are you." So showing attitude, right? So the ego is doing it in a very attitude style. I am me, and you are you. So God punishes the ego in different ways, and then asks, "Who am I, and who are you?" No, it says, "Who am I?" And the ego says, "I am me, and you are you." Again, so showing attitude. And then God makes the ego fast, basically, and then asks, "Who are you?" And the ego says, "I am your servant and you are my creator." So really highlighting again, there's something very powerful about fasting and how it humbles the ego that sometimes no other act can. But just when I say no other act, what's interesting, I'm always emphasizing that different actions, different thoughts are impacting the ego. We're like a bit like a rock. So everything that we do is chipping away or polishing that rock. So fasting might polish it in one way or chip it in one section to round it. Prayer might polish it another way. Good acts could be polishing it or chipping it or refining it in another section. So every act has a way of refining the ego in its own unique way. But in a way, think of it like you need all those actions collectively to have this all-rounded nice rock, like a diamond, for example, where it's being trimmed and polished and refined from all sides so that it looks completely good.